Great to welcome to the show today. Man who's written a very fascinating book just out in paperback, best-selling author of several books on, I guess, basically the topic of innovation. And this one is called Wonderland, How Play Made the Modern World. And we're joined today by Stephen Johnson on the telephone. Stephen, good to talk with you. How are you?
I'm very good. How are you?
I'm doing great. You have a fun job, kind of studying innovation and invention and play and all sorts of fun stuff. So you got a good gig going.
I know. I really do. I'm very lucky.
And what kind of struck me about the book, particularly down here in Florida, and you got a lot of different categories of innovation and how it kind of came about. But the whole Epcot Center, which really was supposed to be something else. I knew a little bit about that, but maybe you can explain that a little bit about Epcot. And it was supposed to really be a city where people lived, but didn't quite turn out that way, right?
Yeah, there's a whole Disney keeps showing up at various points in the book. Actually,
Yeah.
He's also in a chapter on illusion about the first all the pioneering work he did in making Snow White. But it basically comes out of the history of kind of shopping. There's a chapter on the history of kind of shopping and fashion, and I talk about this guy Victor Gruen who basically built the first shopping mall.
Right.
And Gruen was this fascinating figure. He's kind of this European socialist who had emigrated to escape the Nazis and became a shop window designer in New York. And then he had this vision for a kind of a pedestrian space where you could walk around and shop that reminded him, it was inspired by the kind of European city centers that he'd grown up with, like Vienna. And so he built the first mall, basically, in outside of Minneapolis, and built a number of other malls. But his vision was always that it was going to be part of a kind of an urban, what we would now call mixed-use kind of complex. So you'd have this shopping center, but it would be surrounded by residential units, and it would be surrounded by office buildings, and you'd have a whole little dense kind of urban creation. And what ended up happening is people took his shopping mall idea, and they surrounded it with parking lots. And it became the kind of emblem of suburbia, not a kind of a new kind of urbanism. And Gruen eventually felt like he'd been terribly betrayed and, kind of renounced his creation. But he had a fan. He wrote a book about his vision of what these new cities should really look like. And he had a fan in Walt Disney. And Disney, after he'd created Disneyland, was kind of appalled by the kind of highway sprawl around Disneyland in Anaheim.
Right.
And he wanted to... he didn't like the feel of that, so he wanted to create a new kind of urban center inspired by this guy, Victor Gruen, and that's what Epcot was going to be. And Epcot was going to be a completely different kind of city. It was going to have all these really adventurous and quite visionary transportation systems. It was going to be dense, and people would really live there. And then really he died. He got cancer and died very quickly, and his plans kind of got shelved, and when they eventually opened Epcot, it was basically just another theme park. But it's an interesting alternate history where Disney doesn't die and he builds this kind of city. What might have happened if it had worked? We just don't know.
Yeah, I was over there about a year ago. I'd been to Disney in a few years, and there's a little film of him, talking about what his original plans were of Epcot in, I guess, the little Disney building there. But, just like you said, it just became, it's a nice park, nothing wrong with it. More like World's Fair now, but it never grew to what he wanted it to be, and that's kind of a shame in a way, because I think it would have been interesting.
Yeah, absolutely.
And you mentioned the shopping mall. I grew up in Long Island. I always thought Roosevelt Field was the first shopping mall, but it wasn't.
No, it was the Southdale Center in Minneapolis, but Long Island pioneered a lot of suburban developments.
Yes, we have our share. Well, talk a little bit about kind of how you put this book together. Again, it's kind of fascinating. You go back into history and different areas, like you mentioned, fashion, shopping, entertainment, games, and it all kind of, play and entertainment and all that kind of led to innovation and technology, which we enjoy today. It's kind of we don't really think of it that way, but that's where a lot of this technology came from, right?
Yeah, there's so many. I mean, just if you think about the computer itself, there's so many. When you ask, where did the computer come from, right? The conventional way we answer that question is, it was the military with Alan Turing kind of solving cryptographic codes, and then big business, and all of that is true, and those are fascinating stories too. But there's also just a tremendous amount of play. Like there's a really rich connection between music and the computer, like the first truly kind of programmable machines where you could control their behavior with code, and if you wanted to change the behavior of the machine, you took the code out and put new code in, like you would with a modern computer. The first ones were really music boxes. And then things like player pianos, where you had a set of instructions for playing different notes at different speeds and different lengths, and they were encoded in some form, whether it was a kind of mechanical metallic cylinder like music boxes or a piano roll in the case of pianos. But that's really that's the difference. The whole idea, the distinction between hardware and software. That is so important today, really first became imaginable in the space of music, and this kind of seemingly kind of trivial forms of entertainment actually kind of laid the groundwork for that.
Yeah, almost like the original floppy disks were music boxes in a sense, right? You put the different little ring in there, whatever it was called, that would spin and had little bumps on it. Isn't that how it kind of worked, depending on how it was arranged?
Yeah. And that goes back to, more than 1,000 years. That was actually something pioneered in Baghdad, actually, at the height of the Islamic Renaissance. They came up with the idea of these engineers created this thing called the instrument that plays itself. And it was the first kind of programmable machine, 1,200 years ago, more or less.
I enjoyed the story, and I heard a little bit about this in the past, kind of being a bit of a movie buff, but the actress Hedy Lamarr was really quite an inventor. I mean, I know during the war she helped invent something that helped decode classified information, right? She had
a kind of just fascinating history, as well as being a movie star. She was a kind of inventor in her spare time, and she got obsessed with the idea of creating a system for kind of transmitting information, potentially to control a torpedo or something like that,
right.
That couldn't be cracked. And she and her collaborator were actually kind of directly inspired by player pianos. It's another kind of weird way in which player pianos changed the world. And they basically said, you could create a system where the kind of frequency that you're broadcasting on will shift around. And as long as you know where to shift, you can read the code. But if you don't know where to shift, it just sounds like noise, or it doesn't sound like anything because you're not listening on the right level. And that became the basis of what we now call kind of spread spectrum technology, and it's used in things like Bluetooth and cellular phones. And so there's this kind of glamorous Hollywood movie star who's the kind of original, almost patent holder for this technology.
She was the Scarlett Johansson of her day, a very, very hot woman.
Exactly.
Of the movies back then.
Exactly.
And a great cover, in a sense, because you wouldn't have ever thought she would be an inventor. So maybe that's sexist, but you wouldn't have guessed that she was.
Sure.
But,
particularly like that.
Yeah. Well, the book is filled with stories like that, and it's called Wonderland, How Play Made the Modern World, and Stephen Johnson is the author. You also done a lot of work on your PBS series about this, so you keep busy, don't you, Steve?
I try to.
Yeah.
I try to. There's a lot to write about.
You have a website? People get more information about the book and get or contact you?
Yeah, it's Stephen Berlin Johnson, my middle name is Berlin, like the city in Germany, .com.
Great. Stephen, pleasure talking to you. Hopefully we can do it again. Thanks for being with us today.
Thanks a lot.
I'm Stan Brock. 30 years ago, I formed Remote Area Medical to help people overseas. But then we found generations of families in America isolated by poverty from the health care they need. Together, we can take dental, vision, and medical help to 1 million adults and their kids, right here at home in the United States of America.
If you'd like to order the book we're talking about, please go to DougMilesMedia.com and enter the author's name in the Amazon search box. Thank you for listening. Please come back soon for more conversations here at DougMilesMedia.com. This has been a presentation of Doug Miles Media, all rights reserved. You can listen to or download previous programs at iTunes, Stitcher.com, or DougMilesMedia.com.